So we paid 3.8 for it. Um, we structured it. There was a seller note, and we're still figuring that out. But that was a real emotional roller coaster because knowing, hey, we've got this client that's going to leave, and we've got to replace this revenue, and the employees start feeling uncomfortable because they know that client's leaving, and they know we got to replace that revenue, and so having a lot of stability emotionally is difficult when you know your butt's on the line and you've got to make this work. At the same time, you've got to show that stability for the employee. Our churn was a lot higher than we anticipated, and so getting the teams to do kind of the bread and butter of things that they should have been doing all along was painful. It was a little bit like pulling teeth.
Dave, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Thanks. Happy to be here, Sienna.
So you bought a couple interesting businesses. I think there's a lot folks can learn from your journey. They're two very different industries. Can you give us a bit of context?
Yeah, for sure. So we bought an accounting and fractional CFO firm was the first business we bought. And that was in late 2023. And then last year in 2024, in the spring, we bought a traffic engineering firm. So I have a business partner that we partnered on both of those companies and we bought both of those firms.
Tell me a little bit about your background. How'd you get into the business acquisition world?
Yeah, wasn't really ever expecting to get into the business acquisition world, to be honest. I spent about 20 years in tech. So I started a few different companies. One was a credit risk analytics company. We did credit risk analytics for credit unions. Spent about 10 years in that space. Before that, I started a real estate development company. After that, I started a MarTech consulting company, an e-commerce company, did some consulting for startups, and had worked in cybersecurity for about 5 years. Read Buy Then Build while I was in tech, and decided that I didn't want to do startups again. I wanted to buy um, and then build from there. And so I started looking for something to buy. Met my business partner Nick, and told him what I was thinking of doing. He wanted to do it as well. Um, when I started looking for a company, I wasn't really sure. I'm sure like this is pretty common of most people as they start looking. Is I really wasn't. I didn't know what an independent sponsor was. I didn't know what self-funded search was. Like I had no idea what those terms meant. Um, I also didn't know what kind of business I wanted to buy, so I really leaned heavily on what will my background support to do a business rather than let's go buy a business that's completely unrelated to my background. And so as we looked, that's how I kind of narrowed it down to the firms we ended up buying.
If you run a holding company or business with multiple entities, you should definitely listen to this. At Enduring Ventures, we have over 50 bank accounts across our different portfolio companies. Our director of finance, Nick, spends every morning going through those accounts one by one and making sure that the cash balance is where he expects it to be. This used to take him an hour or so every single day. There really wasn't an easier way to do it. Then a friend of mine introduced me to Vesto. Vesto makes it easy to connect all of your bank accounts into a simple dashboard, so you get real-time balances, transactions, and cash flow monitoring, all in one place, with just one login. So Nick got to go from checking 50 different accounts to just checking one account and one dashboard every single day. And a job that used to take Nick almost an hour every day now takes him just a couple minutes or less. If you're managing multiple bank accounts, Vesto is a no-brainer. Go to vesto.com, tell them that Sieva sent you, and you'll get to speak directly to the founder, Ben.
Got it. And you kind of glossed over it, but your tech company that you exited that ended up becoming a pretty meaningful business, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we were the biggest analytics company for credit unions in the country. I exited about 3 years before they sold. They sold to a company called Encino. And, we serviced 800, 900 credit unions across the country, started with, zero and grew and we became the biggest analytics company for credit unions in the country, which was super fun. I spent a lot of time going to credit union conferences and going to DC, and um, we did a lot of different. We expanded the scope of the products that we offered. Um, and most the credit union space, the TAM is not very big. You know, you can only sell to about 3,000 credit unions in the country, if that. It's usually more like 2,200. Um, and we found that credit unions and banks were very different in the way that they did business. So we couldn't just take our product and sell to banks, although we had banks as well. Most of our product was built from um, conversations that we had with credit union executives. So when we started the company, we were actually doing real estate development, and we were building software to kind of value real estate. And some of the credit union executives that were doing our loans, we went to them and said, "Hey, can you use this software in your credit union?" And we went to a credit union and bank at the same time, and the credit union that we went to happened to just latch onto the service, and they really needed it. So the auditors were in. Forced them to mark to market their portfolio. And so they asked us if we could tweak a few things and develop it a little further, and we did. And then that kind of blew up. So we basically have the auditors selling our software for us for quite a long time because it was during the financial crisis. And so they needed every institution to do the analysis that we were doing. And there were other players in the space. Obviously, we had competition, but we we grew about 80 to 100% year over year.
I've heard selling to banks or credit unions is a nightmare and a slog. I've even invested in a company that I watched kind of go through that slog. What
Yeah.
what was the kind of unlock that led you guys to grow so quickly?
Um, part was big part of it was timing, right? Like I'd love to say that we were brilliant in the software that we developed and the SaaS, and yeah, it was a good product, but the reality was it's during the financial crisis, none of the credit unions and banks really marked to market their portfolio before then. And so they were needing to value their real estate. And then we expanded it and we did a lot of other things. But um, so having, you know, a government official come into your business and say, you have to do this. They're not necessarily saying, hey, you have to use this company, which was called Visible Equity, to do that, but you have to do this analysis. And so they had to figure out how to do that. And most of them haven't done it before. And so whether it was us or another company, that helped a lot. We also found in the credit union and banking space that there are quite a few companies that kind of they establish the relationship and then they sell a lot of other products. So our partnerships really worked well in that space, and we were able to keep selling into a lot of different credit unions because of our partnerships, and they already had relationships. So it just it just kind of blew up.
Okay. So good partnerships, good distribution channels, timing. The regulators are basically pushing some version of your product, saying
Yeah.
maybe this is one of the recommended solutions that we have. That's great. And then, how did you meet your business partner who you started buying businesses with?
It was through a mutual acquaintance, a coach that he had used and a friend that I knew. He's started a few different businesses and had a good exit. And then he was coaching Nick on a few things and introduced us. And we went to lunch and kind of nothing happened. And then came back and told him this is what I was doing. And he was actively looking for companies to buy too, because he had started a property management company, a real estate brokerage, um, a house flipping company, and he was not spending a lot of time on his property management company, even though he still owns that. And so he was actively looking for other companies to buy. And I happened to send him, as I was looking for accounting companies to buy, I sent him a big concrete business that was about a $30 million deal just through an accountant that I talked to. Said, "Hey, I'm not interested in selling, but we're doing the books for this other company. Would you be interested?" And so I sent that to him, and then we started chatting, and then the rest is history.
Okay. What kind of advice do you have for folks who are just starting out, maybe considering going on their own or getting a business partner? What do you look for a business partner? How do you know whether you should go alone or work with someone?
I think a lot of it has to do with personality. I think most people are probably going to be better off with a partner than going by themselves. Um, Me included. Like Nick actually likes to be, he likes to do things on his own. He's always done that on his own. I've always had business partners. I think the so part of it's personality to me, but also I think it's important that you find somebody that you can really really trust, right? Like for our partnership, for example, we have these two different businesses, and I don't spend any time on one of them. Nick doesn't spend any time on one of them for the most part, right? Like we collaborate every week. In fact, we have a meeting today, but for the most part, he's spending all of his time in one business, and I'm spending all of my time in one business, and we really have to trust each other and what our capabilities are and our skill sets are to be able to do that independently, right?
Is that hard to do for someone who you just recently met?
Yeah, I mean, it took us a while to get to know each other. Like it wasn't just I made it seem simple, like we just went to lunch and we decided to do this, but it was a lot more intense than that. Like we spent a lot of time getting to know each other, going to dinner. We both belong to this group, this entrepreneur group. We met and had lunch a lot, and so as we started looking, we started getting to know each other and what we wanted to do and the businesses that we wanted to pursue. And so it took a while to get comfortable with that, um, but I think after a certain amount of time, I just started trusting him, and he just started trusting me and what we could do. And now I would trust him with anything, which I think is
That's
important in partnership, right? Like, because I've had a lot of bad partners over the years and good partners over the years, and I think aligning on goals and what you want to accomplish is key, and understanding background, where they're coming from, what they want to get out of it is important too.
Are there specific skills that you think you bring to the table or that he brings to the table, or do you guys have overlapping skill sets?
Um, it's a good question. I think traditionally most partnerships would look for um, skill sets that are complementary but not overlapping, right? I think there's definitely we have some overlapping, but a lot of it's different. It's complementary as well, so I think it works well in that scenario. Nick came from more of a, he kind of started everything on his own. Um, Spent a lot of time in operations, really heavily into automations, and didn't really come from a tech background where I came from a background, like that company I was talking about earlier. I taught myself to program. I did all the operations and marketing. A lot of the sales where Nick was heavier on operations and automation, and in the process for a service business where I came from a tech side. So I think that's been complementary and helpful in those businesses.
So tell me, let's talk a little bit about the first business you guys bought. I think it's called Proven, right? You guys offer a variety of different CPA back office services or accounting and back office services. Can you talk me through how you picked this business and how you found it?
Yeah, for sure. It's so when I decided to buy an accounting firm, um, first of all, I was just getting to know what that actually meant, because there's a variety of different accounting firms that you can buy. So, for example, I learned that you can buy a CPA firm, but in certain states, you can't own a CPA firm if you're not a CPA, right? We're not a CPA firm, but you learn that along the way that you can buy accounting firms, but you can't buy a CPA if you're not a CPA firm if you're not a CPA, for example, in Texas. Most states you can, as long as you have a designated person as the CPA. So you learn about those things, and so you also learn what types of CPA firms or accounting firms that you might want to buy. So a lot of CPA firms are really heavy in attest and audit services. Some CPA firms are heavy in bookkeeping and taxes, and CPA firms are heavy in like consulting, or they're not even CPA firms; they're just consulting firms, right? So I when I started looking, I'd obviously look on the market. So there's a handful of different marketplaces that we would look at. um, for the firms, but I also did my own outreach. So I was reaching out to firm owners every day and probably meeting with, I don't know, probably 5 to 10 a week for a year. So it wasn't consistently every week, but I probably met with 100, 150 different owners over that time.
And you were
So,
just messaging them directly and saying, "Hey, I'd love to grab
yep,
coffee and learn about your
yep.
business." And people are pretty receptive.
Yeah, I got about seven, I mean, really, really high open rates. So like 60 to 7% open rates and probably 10 to 15% reply rates. And then I booked probably 60% of the meetings that replied to me. So they
That's
weren't
great.
always necessarily looking to sell, but they were interested. And I think the difference in like I'm sure you get emails all the time and messages as well as I do, on selling your business or different businesses. And I think one of the reasons my message resonated with them is I was personal in my outreach. Like I told them about my background. Hey, I'm married and I have 3 kids, and this is where I live, and here's my LinkedIn, and this is what I'm looking for. Versus like most of the emails I get are either from PE firms or individuals like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about buying your company, and no background about them or, and I'm sure that works too, but that seemed to work really well for me. So as I was looking at these other companies, I got a good idea of, talking to these owners, the ones that were struggling and the ones that were doing really well and the differences in what they were doing. So for example, a lot of the accounting firms that I talked to, were struggling usually for a couple of reasons. One, they didn't want to outsource or hire remote. They wanted everybody to come into the office, and that seemed to be a problem for the firms that were struggling. Um, Two is they were very tech savvy. They were set in their ways, and they just wanted to keep doing, either hourly billing or whatever they wanted to do. And so over time, I kind of learned there were certain things that companies were doing that they're really succeeding and doing well, and others that were just they were struggling. And those patterns seem to be the same across the companies I talked to. So as I started looking for companies to buy, I actually ran across Proven about a year before we bought it. So I met with the sellers. They were interested at the time, and they called me back a few days later and said, we changed our mind. We're not interested. And I was like, okay, great. Well, let's keep in touch, and then let me know if you guys change your mind. And then fast forward about 8 months later, they called me back and they said, hey, Dave, we're thinking of selling. Are you interested? And there were some red flags for me that I was hesitant to bite on. And um, so I said, no, I'm not. Thanks for the call. And then they listed with a broker about a month later. And I was looking online and saw it, and I knew the numbers, so I knew which company it was even before they gave me the details on it. And so I called the broker and I said, "Hey, I am interested." And as I thought about it, I said, "There's some hair on this deal, but I'm okay with it." And you got to be good with some hair on the deal if you're going to jump in. And that was in May, and then we closed in November, the end of November. And I can go through the details on
So,
that too.
so about a year ago, right?
We closed November 2023.
Okay. What was the situation? Why was the seller looking to sell?
So that was a good lesson for me. So the seller was looking to sell because they were having um, they had built the business as a lifestyle business. So they had a lot of family working in their business. Their mom worked there, their dad worked there, their brother worked there, brother-in-law worked there. Really great people, but I think they'd come into some family friction, and I think that was not what they intended. And they also were super interested in starting a tech company, and so they wanted to get out of the service industry, get into the tech industry, um, and so they wanted to exit, and they thought that an exit would help them solve a lot of the family friction that we're having with the company,
Got it.
which I hope it did.
Well, What were some of the those red flags that you picked up on, um, which made you almost pass on the deal?
The family was a big part of it. I think it was even after we closed, it was still an issue, but um, I I kind of talked myself into it after we started looking at the deal because although they had a lot of family members involved, it's like a typical accounting firm. They were, to avoid paying taxes, like they were paying their spouses that were on payroll, and so the way they were doing it made sense, and the ad backs made sense. Um, and they talked about one of their family members that was doing operations, and he would be really good to keep doing it, and so I got comfortable with it, even though initially I was really skeptical of the whole family dynamics and whether or not that would be good for us or bad for us long term after we closed. Um, so that was the main thing. Another thing that kind of bit us was concentration risk. So I don't know how many companies see this, but because we were an accounting firm and we had clients. So, for example, we had a family office, several family offices where we did their portfolio. Well, when we got the concentration risk report, we weren't necessarily looking at all the names of the clients, but we were looking at this is number one, and they've been a client for 3 years. Well, yes, they've been a client for 3 years, but it's also they're part of this larger parent organization. So our concentration risk ended up being a lot higher than what we thought it was. So we thought it was under 10%, and it ended up being closer to 30% when we closed.
Got it. Okay. And what was the scale of the business when you first discovered it, EBITDA and revenue?
Um, we thought EBITDA was around 700,000, and the revenue was about 2.1 million when we closed.
And is that a normal revenue to income conversion for an accounting business? 30% or so?
Yeah, I mean, usually you'll see 20 to 40% on the high end. Um, and usually the 40% is usually like tax prep companies. Um, so it kind of just depends on the nature of the business, but anywhere from 15 to 40% is pretty normal for an accounting business.
Okay. And what do you mean you thought it was 700,000? What did you learn later on?
Well, that was with ad backs. And so after we closed, the first month was December, which was kind of a wash. We were getting all of our accounting set up and making sure, the transition was going okay. And then in January, when we ran the books, I realized we had a big loss on our books, and I hadn't really
Like the
changed
business was
anything.
negative in the month of January.
Yes, and I hadn't changed anything, so I was confused on what was different between the numbers we got when we were closing and after we closed, right? And so I went back through and I looked and realized that there were a couple things that happened. One was the ad backs for the benefits were too high. So that, I mean, and benefits aren't that much, but they were enough that it made a difference. The other thing that kind of bit us is we had a variable comp for some of our employees, and the variable comp changed just enough when right after we closed that it caused the comp to be a lot higher for some of our executives. And that those two things kind of combined really put us in a bad spot. Um, so we kind of went to work in just fixing that debt or that negative income, right?
Okay.
That we were
Had
having.
you guys
So
changed the compensation or they had changed it before they sold it to you for the variable
it,
comp?
it's not that they had changed it. It just hit a new threshold after we closed because of revenue that was coming in. So they were paid based on revenue they were managing, right? And so that revenue came in, um, they were managing it, bumped them up, and increased variable comp, where what we were modeling, what we looked at historically, they weren't as that big, right? And so we ran up against this friction between what these executives expected to get, um, whether or not they all had those conversations or not, I don't know, but it's what their expectations were is, hey, we're going to keep building this team, we're going to be able to make this much money, and the reality is some of that was never going to happen, but that's what they expected. And so a lot for us was curbing that expectations and getting that to reality of like, here's what you can probably make and here's how your teams will grow. And so we kind of had to reset expectations with a lot of the executives, um, and we just looked at cutting the costs wherever we could, as much as we could over the year.
Okay, so you buy this business, it has over $2 million of revenue. How much did you pay for it, and how did you structure the deal?
So we paid 3.8 for it. Um, we structured it. There was a seller note on it, and we did an SBA loan on it for the rest of it.
Got it. Any earnout or kind of like variable payout dynamics?
No earnout. There's some stipulations on the seller note, but most of that was tied to revenue because, as you know, like EBITDA is kind of squishy and can be manipulated. So there is some things tied to the seller note, that if that didn't happen, then we could obviously claw that back. But that kind of expired after about 5 months after we closed most of that.
Got it. That makes sense. And then did you maximize the SBA? Did you guys try to come in with like 5 or 10% of equity or so to get the deal done?
Yeah, so we have a handful of investors that we raised from, for the equity portion. We obviously contributed our own capital, and then we raised for the rest. So we do have investors in the deal, and we didn't maximize the SBA. Well, we did with both deals, but individually we didn't, for Proven.
And can you educate me a little bit on what does a structure look like with an investor who wants to co-invest with you in a deal like this? What do you
Sure.
offer them?
Um, I, I always, I don't think capital is hard to come by if you find the right deal. But I think for us, we looked at market and we spent a lot of time talking to people about what makes sense and what's going to be attractive, and we just did a step up. So, as you know, like, um, they came in with equity. So say they put in $100 and it's worth $150 of equity, right, in the deal. And so that's what a step up looks like. And we did that with our investors and offered them also a preferred return on their capital. So, unfortunately, because the deal was, a little bit of a turnaround, we haven't paid pref yet, but we'll probably be able to pay that next year.
Got it. So they get some sort of preferred return, and maybe you get a carry on top of their capital. Is that how it works? For
Um,
performance? It's like a waterfall, like a private equity waterfall.
yeah, yeah, for the most part.
Okay. Um, so you've owned the business for about a year. Sometimes I like to say during diligence, you find out about 30% of the business information, and the day after you own it, you find out the other 90%. Um, what have been some of the lessons learned in the last year owning this business, or what have been some of the more kind of painful experiences that you've kind of had to work through?
Yeah. Man, the concentration risk was painful. We had a couple of big clients that, uh, one of the family offices we were serving, the patriarch of the family died, and so they were liquidating all their portfolio companies. So that was painful, to go through. And we had a big client was a client for a lot of years, and they were trying to bring stuff in house. They were just grown big enough, and they wanted to start bringing stuff in house. So that was painful to go through, and we're kind of on the tail end of that now. Um, just resetting expectations with teams, I think, was really difficult. We probably lost 50% of our employees over
Wow.
a year. Um, and a lot of that we had to restructure our teams. So I came in thinking we'd have a lot of processes set up, and they did, but it wasn't structured to scale in the way that we needed to. So it was too top heavy, and so we had to cut that down and restructure the teams. And so we lost some employees when we did that because they had to do other responsibilities that they didn't necessarily sign up to do. So, for example, an accounting manager, we had accounting managers, and they were at the time when we bought it, they weren't interacting with clients. All of our CFOs were; they were just interacting with clients. And we kind of restructured that and had the accounting managers start interacting with clients because they had the capabilities, and some of them were just accountants. They didn't want to talk to people; they just wanted to do the work. So we had some turnover because of that, which is painful to go through because in a service business, you can't just, it's not like tech where you and I can swap positions and like the customer experience is the same, right? Because they're just UI and they're just interacting with the software for the most part. And yeah, they have customer support, customer service, and they're helping. But with the service business, there's a lot more emotion tied to who the people are working with. So it's not like if we didn't have the right person in a position, we can just swap them out within a month or two and do that across the whole client base. We'd lose a lot of clients if we did that. So the restructuring the team and revamping the company has taken a lot longer than I anticipated, just because of those relationships, and we have to be really careful about how we structure the teams and getting the right people in there. And is oftentimes, even when you hire people, you think you get the right person, and then you have to go through one or two people because you just hired incorrectly, right? And so we've been really blessed in the ways that we've structured the team, and we've had really good people and had really good hires. But we had a couple of hiccups that we had to go through when we were hiring, mostly on lower level roles that we had to restructure. Um, but those have been the hardest things. It's not we haven't had any. Our churn was a lot higher than we anticipated, and so getting the teams to do kind of the bread and butter of things that they should have been doing all along um, was painful. It was a little bit like pulling teeth. And once we kind of started doing that, we started seeing churn go down, and we start seeing the clients' satisfaction levels go up quite a bit. And then we
Mhm.
started rolling out new services that we could offer. So we kind of restructured. It was called Proven CFO when we bought it. We rebranded it Proven and we offer HR services now and tax, which we never did, COVs, which we never did before. So we've started expanding the offerings of what we do.
When people buy a small business, especially if they're smart guys like you've built a number of businesses very successfully. I'm sure you look at that company and you think to yourself, okay, it's doing 2.1 million of revenue. I think I could maybe in the first year while I learn the business, grow at 5, 10%, and then then we'll be off to the races. And I see that a lot. I've done that myself as well. And you step into the business and you learn so much more about this industry that maybe you loosely knew. Of course, you did a lot of research on it, but now you know so much more. And half your employees leave over the ensuing 6 months, and you realize that you have more customer churn than you want, and you're signed as a personal guarantor on the SBA.
Yep.
So it's a lot scarier and a lot riskier than I think most people really um, really grasp by kind of following us on Twitter and whatnot, and thinking to themselves, this is the one path to success. So, I'm just curious, like what has been the emotional roller coaster? How has it felt over the last 6 months or so?
You know, I always thought running a startup was more stressful, would be the most stress. And I think this has been more stressful than a startup. Because a startup, I, you know, it depends on how you do a startup. Like if you bootstrap or if you raise from venture, seed rounds, whatever, right? Um, there's different types of pressure in a startup for growth, right? Like all the investors want the hockey stick growth and growing 100% year over year or more, right? And then there's this constant. What I didn't like about tech was this constant. Hey, It's always about raising money, right? Um, and so that's one of the reasons I got out of tech is I didn't like that. Hey, let's raise, and it's not about the business or the functionality of the business. It's about raising money until you can get to a unicorn status. That was stress. That's stressful because you can run out of money and you have to go raise to get more money. Whereas this, my stress levels are way different. With a startup, you don't. I mean, I haven't heard of any that have personal guarantees on their startup, right? I mean, that's completely different. So in January when we were at that loss, I was having lots of sleepless nights because I'm like, what does that mean for me? Like, how do I deal with this? What do we have to cut? Like, what can we cut? What can we cut without having issues? Like, where can we replace revenue or where can we bump up revenue? So we were lucky and in what we were able to do because a lot of the churn that we did have, we were able to replace that revenue. Like, I came in thinking most of our revenue was coming in from referrals, and it was supported by the sellers telling me that, and which they may have had a lot of referrals. That's fun, but it's also supported by a lot of the companies that I talked to. Like, how do you guys get your business? What are you guys kind of doing? And they were confirming that most of their clients came from referrals. Now, the cadence of that and the speed of that, the velocity of that is different for every company. So I came in thinking I'm not going to have to worry about leads necessarily. I got to worry about closing. And that was not the case at all. So we kind of started from scratch. We started SEO, we started uh, Facebook ads, Google ads, partnerships, and that took a long time to kind of figure out the channels are working. We're still figuring that out. But that was a real emotional roller coaster because knowing, hey, we've got this client that's going to leave and we've got to replace this revenue. And the employees start feeling uncomfortable because they know that client's leaving and they know we got to replace that revenue. And so, you know, having a lot of stability emotionally um, is difficult when you know your butt's on the line and you've got to make this work. But at the same time, you've got to show that stability for the employees, knowing that you can bring back the revenue that are losing from the churn. And so it was emotional for eight months, I think. And I think you kind of learn to deal with chaos and then you just learn to live with chaos. And I think once you reach that point and then you just keep moving forward, it gets better.
You become a battle-hardened warrior. Your wounds turn into scars. Your scars don't block you from future wounds, basically. You know.
That's right. Yep. But it was painful. It
Um,
was painful to go through.
I totally feel that, man. I definitely feel that. And where's revenue now? Are you guys kind of back to where you were when you bought the business, or how does it
Yeah.
compare?
Yeah, I mean, we grew about 10% the first year. I mean, even though
Oh,
we
you did
had,
it despite all the
yeah,
chaos. Okay, the
despite all the
underwriting
chaos,
worked.
yeah, we still grew and we had, our churn was close to 40%. So, I
Wow.
mean, so, it was good, even though we had high churn. And I think this year we'll probably grow 20% if, you know, if if our numbers keep up where I think they will. So um, it's definitely in the right trajectory. And I think we kind of had to burn it down to kind of build it back up, which was
Yeah.
painful. It's painful, especially from investors' standpoint. Like you want to be able to give your investors back their capital as quickly as possible, right? And I think being honest and transparent with them about, hey, this is the business we thought we were getting. This is the business we actually own. And just helping them understand like this is probably the timeline to get capital back and these are our options to do that um, is is something that I believe in. Like no matter what, you want to make sure you pay back the people that support you in growing and acquiring the business. And so it's just making sure that they have the right expectations, and then we we set the ship on the right path to get us there. It just took us a lot to get there, and now I feel like we're finally on the tail end of that.
That's awesome. This is a great turnaround story. I'm excited for the future of it. So you you didn't rest. You bought that business midway through your turnaround. You decided that you're going to buy another business, which I think you're fond of as well. Can you tell me a little bit about the other company that you guys bought, how you found it, how you structured the deal?
Yeah, so this one is obviously very different than accounting, which, funny enough, as different as they are. So one is a Proven was an accounting company by its NICS code, and this other company called Hell's Engineering is a traffic engineering company. And the SBA says that if you get different businesses in different sectors, you can get 5 million for each, right?
Hmm.
But because the three numbers of the NICS codes were the same, they wouldn't allow us to do that with these two companies. So hindsight, I think we would have structured it differently because it capped us by buying both those companies, where both of them we want to do other acquisitions in each of them. And we couldn't get more SBA debt right now. So we're in the process of restructuring that so that we can open up the more debt for the SBA. So this other company, my business partner Nick was at independent sponsor um, conference in Dallas and was talking to a broker that had mentioned that this we were looking for another business, and this business was listed and it had the wrong address, I guess, listed on the site. And so we took advantage of that. Nick met with the owners and we put an LOI um, and got it. And this business was a lot different because we do traffic studies, engineering for municipalities, for developers. Um, the seller was not looking to do something else in his career. He was looking to retire. And now those are the kind of businesses that if most people that are looking for businesses to buy, those are the kind you want. You don't want someone that's kind of, I think there's too many variables when you buy from people that aren't retiring. Like, what's the actual reason that they're selling the business? And where this person was retiring, he was staying on for, 6 months consulting with us after. There was a lot of stability. He had a second command that we could put into the lead role. So that made it possible for us, because neither one of us are engineers. So it made it possible for us to buy an engineering firm and have someone who has the licenses, has the know how, can step into the lead role. And even though he wasn't a manager before, or wasn't used to being a manager and a leader, he had the right background to know the engineering and to know how to do that. So we could coach him on how to be a better manager and better leader, and kind of coach him up on where he was maybe missing some skills.
What was the scale of this business and how did you guys think of pricing for it?
So it was a little bit bigger. Um, we priced it, in the 2 to 3x on EBITDA,
Hmm.
and um, it was about a $4 million business, and we had a seller note for that as well. We also raised from different investors that we have. We only have one investor in that company, and they have a background in construction, and they've owned a lot of construction companies, and so it made sense because they have a good background to help us where we may be lacking in knowledge in some of those areas. And from start to finish, it was about 90 days once we went under LOI and closed on it. And that one's been pretty smooth, to be honest. Proven was very much more of a turnaround and a lot different than what we expected. But that one, um, you know, we've had some hiccups like anything, but it's pretty much gone as we planned. And like our biggest problem there is just cash flow. Like, our accounts receivable is just different. It's just how the industry's done. Whereas Proven, you know, all of our bills are paid up front. Where this one, you know, developers, municipalities might take 90 days, 120 days to pay their bills. You know, they're big checks too.
So you get, do you guys get financing for that? Or you guys factor in receivables or you just, yeah.
Yeah. So we did a credit line for that, and we draw from it when we need to, and pull from it. But yeah, the biggest thing with that one is just uh, it's just cash. But other than that, it operates pretty smoothly.
So some learnings from this one seem to be, ideally you're looking for an owner that's ready to retire, not looking to jump to something else. Maybe that shows that there's a better opportunity out there than running their current business. Ideally, there's some kind of transition service timeline, and very importantly, that they have a team in place that can run the business. That's also very important to us, by the way. What were some other learnings that you think you can share with folks, either comparing the two businesses or just in hindsight as to what you'll look for in the future based on what you've seen works and doesn't work?
You know, one thing I really like about the engineering company is the niche that we're in. It's a niche within civil engineering. So you think civil engineering, there's a lot of different things that civil engineers do, and we're a niche within that niche. And so that plays to our advantage within the market. So we have quite a bit of market share within the market that we're in. And a lot of that has to do with because we're specialized in what we do. So some civil engineering firms can and do what we do, but they typically don't like to because they like to focus on their core competency, and this isn't necessarily it. So I think finding businesses that are really niche within a niche can really be advantageous. We don't necessarily have to go out and hunt for business a lot with that business. A lot of it comes to us because of relationships over time, and because they know, hey, who does traffic engineering in this space? And there's only a handful that they'll go to. So we get a lot of looks for that reason. So in my opinion, like finding a business that is very niche is very advantageous, right? Whereas like proven, um, we get referrals from all over the place, and it's not necessarily um, we get business just coming to us all the time. We have to go look for that business and look for people that need help, and find that. Where, you know, the engineering company, we don't have to do that necessarily. So that's one learning, is niches. I really like niches, and I would definitely go and look at niches again. Like I've looked at other companies, like water treatment for municipalities, where there's a company that just supply the pumps for the municipalities, and that's all they do, and they don't have a lot of competition, and their margins are like 40%. You know, it's just great business that I would love to own, and I think a lot of those companies is what I'd focus on in the future, and get some. I think having the continuity of someone that's worked in the business for a long time that wants to continue is really important to us, going forward as well. And that can depend. Like if we're looking for roll ups under proven, in similar spaces, and I think we're not necessarily looking for someone that wants to stay on long term for that. But if we're buying independent, like what do we did with the engineering firm, we would definitely look for people that wanted to stay on.
What is your long-term plan for these businesses? Do you think you'll hold it for a number of years and sell them? Do you intend to hold them and cash flow them? What are you thinking?
Depends on the day, if you ask me. But for the most part, we planned to buy and just hold for as
Mhm.
long as we didn't ever plan to sell any of the businesses. So would I say we'd never sell? No, but the plan, from the get go, was just to build these up, cash flow them, and just keep using that cash flow to buy other businesses, right? And just keep doing the same thing. Um, yeah, I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago, and I, they've been doing independent sponsor for 20 or 30 years, and near retirement. I said, you know, what would you do? I said, I'm 45, and I want to be kind of where you're at when I retire. What would be your advice? You know? And he said, the one thing I wish I wouldn't have done is, he said, I had to raise capital for, well, a lot of the deals that I did. He said if I had a cash flowing company that I sold and I regretted it and I tried to buy it back, and he said if I had kept that cash flowing company, I could have used that cash flow to keep buying the other companies that I bought. And he said I wish I would have done that because I wouldn't had raised hardly any money at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you own more. You don't have people that you have to kind of report to or be reliable to, and you kind of control your destiny, I guess, in that case.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Dave, this was great. I appreciate you sharing your story. I know you're still writing it for these companies, so I'm excited to check in with you in a year or two and see how things are going. What's a good way for folks to either reach out if they're interested in learning more or just get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can shoot you my email. My email is dave@proven.co. They can email me. I'm happy to have any conversations or answer any questions or just help people. Like a lot of people have helped me, and I'm willing to help others too if they need it.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story. Thank you, Dave.